This is a reading of a document that I wrote entitled The American's Duty, a Statement on Responsible Resistance. Before we begin, I want to apologize for the quality of my microphone. I don't have anything better, and I feel that the subject being discussed today is worth recording with or without such a microphone. So please don't allow the quality of the recording or the audio to influence in any way the message that I am attempting to convey. Thank you. In the immortal words of our founding fathers, enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, we are reminded that while stability in governance is valuable, there comes a point when citizens must recognize their solemn duty to oppose tyranny. This statement draws inspiration from their wisdom to outline the moral responsibilities of every American when faced with governmental overreach. We Americans stand as inheritors of a profound legacy, a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that government exists to secure the rights of its citizens and not to diminish them. The Declaration of Independence established not merely a new nation, but a revolutionary principle, that when government betrays its fundamental purpose, resistance becomes both a right and an obligation. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. This wisdom reminds us that stability has value, and discontent with particular policies or temporary setbacks does not justify radical action. We acknowledge that imperfect governance is inevitable, and patience with democratic processes is a civic virtue. However, our forebears clearly articulated that this patience has limits. When government exhibits a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object, when the pattern reveals a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, citizens must recognize the threshold has been crossed. At this point, simple compliance becomes complicity. When systematic abuses occur, when rights are methodically eroded, when power concentrates against the public interests, it becomes their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. The statement establishes resistance not merely as permissible, but as morally obligatory. This duty supersedes ordinary legal obligations. Laws created by tyrannical systems to protect themselves from accountability cannot morally bind citizens. The legitimacy of law itself depends on government remaining faithful to its founding principles. Resistance takes many forms, beginning with the least disruptive and escalating only as necessary. The first is vigilant awareness, educating oneself about rights, recognizing patterns of abuse, and refusing to normalize violations of constitutional principles. The second is vocal opposition, speaking truth to power through protected speech, peaceful assembly, and petitioning for redress of grievances. The third is electoral engagement, utilizing democratic processes to remove officials who violate their oaths or enable systematic abuses. The fourth is civil disobedience. When necessary, the dignified refusal to comply with unjust laws, accepting potential consequences while appealing to higher principles. The fifth is organized resistance, collective action through legal means to restore constitutional governance. And finally, the sixth and most important, ultimate recourse. As a last resort, when all other avenues have failed and despotism becomes evident, the founding generation recognized the necessity of a more fundamental action to secure liberty. This extraordinary measure becomes justified only when government has betrayed its foundational purpose through systematic oppression, and it cannot be remedied through ordinary means. Not every disagreement qualifies as despotism. The threshold requires systematic rather than isolated abuses, clear patterns revealing an intent to diminish liberty, violations of fundamental rather than peripheral rights, and the exhaustion of ordinary remedies. When these conditions are met, inaction becomes a betrayal of both our founding principles and future generations. Therefore, we assert that responsible American citizenship demands constitutional literacy and vigilance against encroachments, moral courage to stand against popular but unconstitutional measures, discernment between ordinary political disagreements and true threats to liberty, recognition that our rights are interdependent. An attack on any right threatens all of our rights, and understanding that defense of liberty is never complete and requires eternal vigilance. Today we face a concrete manifestation of governmental overreach in the form of Project 2025. This comprehensive policy agenda represents a blueprint for dramatic executive branch expansion through systematic dismantling of constitutional guardrails and civil service protections. The project's documented intentions include the consolidation of unprecedented power in the executive branch, and the felon president Donald J. Trump in particular. Redefining core constitutional principles through administrative fiat. Enabling politically motivated purges of career civil servants. Reconstructing federal agencies to serve partisan rather than public interests. Implementing policies that would fundamentally alter the balance of power. Project 2025's comprehensive scope and methodical approach to restructuring governance signals precisely the kind of design to reduce them under absolute despotism that our founders warned against. When governance shifts from public service to power consolidation, from constitutional fidelity to executive supremacy, we approach the threshold where resistance becomes not merely justified, but necessary. When discussing ultimate recourse, we must acknowledge its gravity. Our founders did not lightly include this final option, yet they considered it essential to articulate. Ultimate recourse becomes morally justified when systematic rights violations occur with increasing frequency and severity. Institutional safeguards have been deliberately weakened or neutralized. Legal remedies become unavailable as courts are captured or marginalized. The electoral process itself has become compromised beyond repair. Government uses force to suppress legitimate dissent. And the fundamental compact between government and governed has been irrevocably broken. At this critical juncture, citizens face their most solemn duty: to restore legitimate governance through extraordinary means. History teaches that this path carries immense risks and should never be undertaken lightly or prematurely. Yet, our founders recognized that certain circumstances may render it not merely an option, but an obligation. The implementation of agendas like Project 2025 by the Trump administration proceeds to systematically dismantle constitutional safeguards, politicize justice, weaponize federal agencies against citizens and non-citizens alike, and concentrate unchecked power in defiance of traditional checks and balances. And we are fast approaching the threshold where Americans must confront their ultimate responsibility. It is their right, it is their duty. With these words, our founders established that American citizenship carries not just privileges, but profound responsibilities. When government betrays its essential purpose, we are not merely permitted to resist, we are obligated to do so. The preservation of liberty depends not primarily on documents or institutions, but on citizens willing to stand firm when those documents are ignored and those institutions are corrupted. In the American system, sovereignty ultimately resides not with the government, but with the people. This statement affirms that this sovereignty comes with the solemn duty to exercise it responsibly, but firmly, when the principles that define us as a nation are under threat. The American experiment demands on citizens who understand that there are times when loyal opposition to government becomes the highest form of patriotism. As we stand at this pivotal moment in American history, witnessing the implementation of Project 2025 by the Trump administration, we must remember that the threshold for ultimate action is high, but it exists. When government demonstrates consistent pattern and practice that it seeks absolute power rather than public service, when it shows contempt for constitutional constraints and the rule of law, the American people must be prepared to fulfill their solemn duty: the restoration of legitimate government of, by, and for the people. The reading of my statement is completed, but I wanted to put a little bit of commentary here at the end because I do think it's important. The Trump administration is not just a 4-year problem. There are so many issues going on with the administration now that to not see the comparisons between kings and Adolf Hitler and Donald Trump, or fascist governments like Benito Mussolini or the government in Spain, would be irresponsible as an American citizen. A lot of people tend to think that the government itself is going to stand, and that the government as it is the only way the government is supposed to be constituted. However, the reality is we have a responsibility as American citizens to be vigilant, to guard our government, and to guard our rights and our freedoms. The fact that a felon named Donald Trump has become president not only once, but twice, after having led a January 6th riot and revolt which attempted to take over the government, we can't call that anything other than a coup. The fact that there are people out there that are so inept and unable to understand that Donald Trump is a dictator. Donald Trump is the exact person that our founding fathers were warning us about. And yet here we are with him sworn in as president. He's in the White House. He is protected by laws that are defended by a Justice Department and police agencies that are so corrupt that statements like I'm making now have every chance of having me thrown in jail simply for making this statement. And that's a problem. Our courts, our government has been so corrupted and so completely dismantled by Donald Trump, and he is continuing to do so, that it's not simply a matter of impeaching him. Not that that will do anything, since he's already been impeached twice, the only president to have ever had that occur. But he has a proven track record of revolting against the government, of attempting to obtain absolute power in the same way as the fascists and the same way as Adolf Hitler. It is our responsibility as citizens, no matter what the cost, no matter what the price, to speak up, and if it becomes necessary, to revolt. To provide the safeguards for our liberty that say enough is enough. We are American citizens imbued with freedom, imbued with rights through our Constitution and the sacrifices of our founding fathers, the people that have served in the military and died to preserve those freedoms. And a government by Donald Trump is not what we want. We want a government of, by, and for the people, and I will die fighting for that. I will die making sure that I continue to speak out. I don't care if the federal government wants to come after me for making these statements. I have a First Amendment right to make these statements. I'm not advocating armed revolt. I'm not advocating assassinating Donald Trump or any other political figure. What I am advocating is for a revolution when and if it becomes necessary. If that revolution includes the peaceful transition of power, then so be it. If it involves another 1776, then so be it. That is for people to make their mind and their decision for themselves. But do not stand idly by and allow a fascist dictator named Donald Trump and his political appointees and his political cronies, and hell, his followers, his MAGA followers and his cronies and everybody else that seems to think that he is God, to dictate whether your rights, your freedoms, and your liberties are still valid. I know that I tend to ramble during this statement. There's a lot that I'd like to say, and I will continue to make more videos on the subject, but I highly, highly, highly urge you to consider what has been said, what has been written. I am linking a copy of my statement down below, and I urge you to pass it on. I urge you to pass this video on, and please do not stand idly by while Donald Trump and his criminal elite destroy our American way of life. Thank you.